Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinya, and today my guest is Jackie Ferguson. Jackie, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nils. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm super excited to have you on, Jackie. You are a diversity and equity inclusion expert and co-founder of the diversity movement. Would you share a little bit about the diversity movement and what it is? And that's going to kind of set the context for our entire conversation today.
Absolutely. So at the diversity movement, we partner with organizations that use the tools of diversity, equity, and inclusion to create cultures of belonging and innovation and ensure profitable and sustainable business. And we do that through our expert created content, programming, technology products, and training to meet organizations wherever they are and wherever they're starting to help them move forward with customized solutions.
And that's a key piece, wherever they are and helping them move forward. Because I imagine you see a very, very wide range from an organization perspective of how much they embrace this, how much they live it, even if they believe in it, do they take action? What in the grand scheme, from a DE&I perspective in the organizations that you work with, where are most of our organizations?
I think that's a great question, Nils. And I think most organizations are at the point, at least, where they know they need to make this important. So that's a good start, right? That's the step one. But where they are on that journey, some organizations haven't really started yet. Some organizations have some framework. They've, done a few things. And then some organizations are pretty far along because they've been, doing this for years. And so one of the things that we do at the diversity movement as we get working with a new client is to assess where they are in that journey and then what their capacity is to learn and grow. Some organizations and some, leadership groups are very excited about making strides forward quickly. And some, still feel that hesitation of, I'm not sure where to go or what to do, or if I say the wrong thing, and that's okay too. And we move at the pace that's required for each organization.
That's wonderful. Well, I love how there's no one cookie cutter, here's a 6-week program and you're done. Like, this is not a
Exactly
check
right.
the box kind of exercise, right?
That's right, Nils. Exactly right.
This is more of a integrated into your culture, and wherever you are today, there are ways to do that. And we're going to talk about some of that in just a little bit.
Absolutely.
Okay, cool. So before we get into that, though, want to find out a little bit about your backstory and how did you come to get to this place of, being a co-founder of the diversity movement? What did you experience that brought you to this point?
Yeah. And Nils, I always like to say that I was born into diversity and inclusion. The reason I say that is because I come from a multi-racial, multi-generational, multi-regional family. And, having my parents and my grandparents in the same house after my grandparents retired, I got to, at my own dinner table, experience how people see current events or things that are happening through different lenses and lenses of experience right there at the table. And then I understood, one, how to process that, how to take different pieces of information and take those perspectives for myself to determine what I wanted to do with them and how that related to how I saw the world. And it allowed me to be more open, and then also taught me very young how to message people who think differently than I do. And I think that was certainly a plus. Then spending time working for executives for the majority of my career in executive support, working in marketing and sales, and then in HR as well. All of that has to do with DEI. And, depending on what that role is, DEI is important for each of those things, whether it's, in marketing, how you're messaging, right, your client base and your customer base to make sure that you have a broader market share, or sales and how you're, sharing the needs that people have for your product or business, to executive support, and how that DEI shapes your bottom line and profitability for your business. So I got to work in many different industries, in many different roles over my career, and that's how I developed a love for DEI. So I think it's a combination of all of those things. And
Yeah.
then I had the opportunity in working with a marketing agency where our current CEO was CEO at the time. And we were creating courses for marketing and creating courses for professional development. And what he saw was a gap in the market for organizations in marketing specifically that did not have diversity within their realm and within their network, and
Yeah.
we did as an organization. And so he
Mhm.
wanted to create a course that would kind of message those agencies and say, look, this is important, this is why you need it. And so I volunteered to go ahead and write that course, while I was learning, while I was growing in DEI and getting certified as a certified diversity executive. And it was well received. So super excited about that. And from there, Nils, people wanted to know what was next. In our organizations that we were working with, took the course, said, this is great. Now what do we do? And
Mhm.
that's how the diversity movement was born. So,
Wow. That's
yeah,
such an incredible story. I mean, it's not very often that you are born into a role that ends up becoming your career. And I think
exactly
that's
right.
just so, I mean, when we talk about alignment from a leadership perspective, like that's it.
That's right.
There's, every time I talk to you, there is nothing but alignment. And I hear it in your passion, I hear it in your voice, and I hear it and I see it in everything that you do. And also seeing it throughout your incredible book called The Inclusive Language Handbook, a guide to better communication and transformational leadership. And I
Yes.
bookmarked a ton of sections in this because I want to go deeper with you, get your perspective, share some insights and expertise with our audience here who are all leaders or aspiring leaders, inside of a professional context. And I know this
Absolutely.
much of this applies universally as well, but there are some things that I
Mhm.
found in your book that I blew my mind, and I, just took it for granted or kind of
Yeah.
assumed that that was okay or that was something, and it has completely changed my perspective. So,
Hmm.
if it's okay with you, we'd like to do a little bit of a deep dive through the book. Is that cool?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the first piece that caught my attention was in the beginning, and it was in the chapter titled "What's in a Word,"
Hmm.
and the what you said about the power of a single word. And
Hmm.
I thought that was really interesting because oftentimes, especially from a leadership perspective, it can take years to build trust and years to build
Absolutely.
relationships, whether that's with a colleague, a client, somebody else, an executive, whatever it is. It can take years, but trust can be destroyed in a matter of a minute or
Yeah.
sometimes perhaps even a word. Would you share with us a little bit more about what the power of a word really means?
Absolutely. Well, communication is so important in general, and especially for leaders. Um, in developing trust, those employees, those clients, your shareholders are listening to everything that you say. And very often, based on what they might have experienced in the past, critically so. And so you want to be careful about what it is that you're saying. But I don't want to create fear, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
there's that fear too of I'm afraid to say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And so you need a combination of the education in understanding what are the right things to say, the better things to say, words that are more inclusive, and then also understanding that you can retain that trust, even saying something that's wrong, by saying, you know what, I said something, it wasn't as inclusive as it
Mm-hmm.
could have been. And this happens to me all the time, even after writing the book, right? There are words that we say and phrases that we've used. And the most important thing to remember, Nils, is especially as you're going through the book and discovering, oh, I say that, I've said that before, right?
Yep.
Is that it's a learning journey. And if you
Mhm.
say something that isn't inclusive, correct yourself right there. That allows you to keep trust with
Mm.
people and just remind people, you know what, I'm learning my inclusive language or I'm practicing my inclusive
Yeah.
language. And I said this, it wasn't as inclusive as it should be. I should have said this instead.
I love that.
And apologies go a long way.
Long
And
ways.
so while you're, reading this book particularly and going through and learning some of those words that we've said, and Nils, I'll tell you, some of those things were things that I said all my life.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Right.
bet.
And it
Wow.
took a long time to work out of it. But it's okay. You're on a journey. You want progress over perfection, which is the most important
Mhm.
thing. And then, just remind people that you're practicing inclusive language and and it's okay to ask people too, like, what do you prefer I say in this case, or what
Yeah.
makes you feel most seen or most respected in this
Mhm.
space.
Yep.
And that's how you can practice and retain that trust as well.
Mm.
Because I think a lot of leaders especially are very afraid of
Yes.
saying that wrong thing. And we've seen, in the news what happens when people,
I
right,
right.
say the
One
wrong
word
thing.
in the news, you get vilified, right?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And the thing about it, Nils, that I try to remind people in general is most of the time, people are not intentionally trying to offend you. It's something
Right.
they don't know, they've never thought
Right.
about.
Yeah.
And so, it's important to give grace and to others, and also to give grace to yourself as you're learning
Yeah.
through that journey.
That's just incredible advice. So let me ask you this: if a leader who was listening to this and got a copy of your book and found some things just like I did, and was going to be working on that progress, not perfection, would
That's
you
right.
advise that they share their intentions, perhaps with their team, and say, you know what, team, one of my focuses and growth areas as a leader is going to be using more inclusive language, and I want you to be aware that I'm going to be making an effort towards this, so
Mhm.
that if I don't, or if I inadvertently offend you, I want the feedback to tell me so that I can improve. Would you advise sharing that sentiment, to put it out there and just have it be an okay thing from the get go?
Nils, absolutely. That's such great advice because if we're thinking about trust, which is so important for leaders, and I love that you brought that up so early in the conversation because it's a thread throughout.
Yeah.
You want transparency. So share that you're learning, that you're practicing. And people respect that and people appreciate that. And people want to help you get better and
Yeah.
participate in that. And I
Yeah.
think that allows you to have a little bit of wiggle room to practice and try and make mistakes and correct it and apologize and do
Hmm.
better and all of those things in that learning journey.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So the next piece I saw was a point about, for every 10% more racially or ethnically diverse a company's senior team is, earnings
Mhm.
before interest and in taxes are nearly 1% higher.
Yeah.
So we're talking about monetary and valuation gains far beyond just, being inclusive and making a safe environment, but we're talking about some serious monetary gains when, depending on the size of the company, that could be a huge, huge value add. Is that right?
Absolutely, absolutely. The thing that we discovered, Nils, is people started moving into DEI as an initiative. There was the first step of that was this is the right thing to do, right?
Hmm. Yes.
And organizations were participating in that because they want to create those environments and cultures of belonging. Well, what we've been able to find over the past 20, 30 years from the studies that have been conducted is that it's also better for business.
Hmm.
That's a great statistic. Companies that prioritize DEI are also 19% more profitable through innovation.
Wow.
So they get 19% more revenue through innovation.
Wow.
And what that means is because you've got more voices at the table, different voices at the table that are more reflective of our society, you're going to understand better how people think, what offends them and what doesn't, right? How to message them,
Yeah.
what their behaviors and habits are. And because you've got more of that information at the table, you're able to create products
Mm.
and, also processes that are better and more inclusive and message or um, create products for more people.
Yeah.
And so the
Hmm.
thing that's important to remember about that is it affects revenue, it affects your profitability because happy employees are more productive employees.
Yeah.
And in fact, it was Oxford that did a study that said happy employees, right? Employees that are in situations where they feel that culture of belonging and feel valued and feel like they're contributing are 13% more productive. And that's almost, I think it's almost an hour a day of more productive work.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that over time per employee adds up to a lot of
Yeah.
profitability.
That does. And straight to the
Yeah,
bottom line, which is
that's
where we
right.
all need it, right? Where we
That's
all
right.
want it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the fascinating thing is there's a lot of different ways to drive an increase in profitability, right?
Hmm.
You can cut costs, you can, acquire another company, you can go
Yeah,
down a million different paths, but here's one that is more of an integration into the thing which already exists, which is your company and its untapped potential, I guess I would say, in
absolutely.
that moment. That's really
That's
fascinating.
exactly right. Hmm.
Okay. So in the next piece, there was a stat here. It said 50% of LGBTQ plus workers are not quote unquote out to their current supervisor. And
Hmm.
what I found fascinating about that was just the awareness that potentially half of people who might be even in that category, you would never know. So if you inadvertently use some language that is not appropriate, you might be offending and have no clue that it actually happened. Like
Nils,
what?
that's so true.
How do we as leaders then how do we approach that kind of a situation just with that awareness now?
Nils, I love that you talked about that. And, just digging into that a little further, you also don't know families are multicultural now,
Yeah,
right? So you never know whose grandchildren might look different than you do, right?
yeah,
And so
right,
you're having these same conversations in the workplace that you had, 10 years ago, and you're offending
yeah,
a very productive, important employee and have no idea. And so that's why inclusive language is so important because you're creating a culture, irrespective of who is in the room, right? Where people feel included and valued and
yes,
safe. And whether you know or don't know who that person is and all of the facets of their identity or all of the facets of their family's identity,
mm-hmm.
you're practicing for the broader society,
Yeah,
which is so important. And as we think about Nils, Gen Z coming into the workplace, they are more diverse than ever
yeah,
in so many different aspects. And so you need to get there because they care about that more than, I'm a Gen Xer, right? And there was
yeah,
a lot of head
mm-hmm.
down, do your work, get promoted at the appropriate time.
Yep,
There's some off-color jokes and some things that make you uncomfortable. Don't worry about it. Just keep working,
yeah,
right? You don't want to ruffle any feathers, right? That was all the things that
that's
that
right.
you were taught as a Gen X person coming into the workplace. And Gen Z is not like that at all. They want to speak up. They want to work for organizations where their values align with their personal values. And
Mm-hmm.
DEI as a practice is so important
Yeah,
to furthering your recruiting efforts and your retention efforts for
right.
Gen Z.
Because if your company is going to be around for the long haul, it has to serve the next generation of workers. It can't just think about the here and now. And there's probably people in leadership positions across a lot of organizations that are from sometimes two or even three generations prior. And the more
That's
awareness
right.
that they have about what the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years looks like, the better they can build their organizations to be more profitable and have a much more inclusive environment.
Nils, that's so right. And and I use this example. I know people that listen to me a lot are probably tired of this example, but I
I
love
want to hear
to
it.
use it.
Let's hear it.
So, I think about Blockbuster, right? And
Hmm.
Blockbuster, the same thing happened with Blockbuster.
Yes.
As a Gen Xer, Friday night, you go to Blockbuster, you got your 2 new releases and your popcorn, right?
Yep.
And you couldn't think of anything else.
Yeah.
And Netflix met with Blockbuster and said, "Hey, we've got this great new idea. This is the wave of the future," right? And Blockbuster thought that was hilarious
Yep.
and brushed them out. And now we know, like, we all know how to access our Netflix account and could
That's
not
right.
find a Blockbuster card if there was $1,000 on the table, right?
Right. Absolutely right. I remember we used to drive, 25 minutes from our house to go to Blockbuster just to
That's
rent the
right.
movies, to turn around, drive 25 minutes home. And we spent at least 30 minutes in Blockbuster wandering the halls, right? Because there were
Correct.
so many. And that was the whole goal, was to try to get you to stay in there for longer time. So that's a
Exactly right.
wonderful analogy and
Mhm.
perfect example of what happens if you don't pay attention to the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years and think about that, right?
That's right, because Blockbuster was not listening for the
Hmm.
change in the
Yeah.
habits
Yeah.
of this next generation.
Yeah.
And so because they weren't, they were thinking about me, who's in there every Friday night with my Skittles and right. And
And the popcorn, they always had free popcorn. Come back,
that's
you're gonna
right.
get some free
That's
popcorn.
exactly right. They were thinking about me. They weren't thinking about the millennials coming
Yeah,
after and said, I want to access my movies when I want them.
yeah,
And because they didn't, right? That's what happens to businesses that are not embracing this.
yeah.
It's DEI is necessary for sustainable business.
I think that's probably one of the most powerful one-liners. Like, well, if you don't want to be the next Blockbuster, better get on the DEI
That's
train
right.
and start integrating that and figuring out, and hopefully get some help from Jackie and her wonderful team on how to bring this and how to, future-proof the next 20 years of your company. I think
Exactly
that's
right,
an
Nils.
incredibly powerful message.
Mhm.
Okay, so there's a ton of language examples
Yeah,
in the book, and these were some of the things that caught my attention. Wanted to ask you about them, and again, just like you said, like things that I've said all my career, probably all my life, and
right.
probably didn't really think twice about it. And
Mhm.
then reading the description and understanding a little more behind it, then could clearly see, okay, now that I see a different perspective, right? Whereas before is just kind of tunnel vision, there you go. So, one of the most standard is the he or she, right? Or
Mhm.
ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and
Yeah,
gentlemen is that they used at the beginning of a million speeches,
that's right.
right? And I was shocked to see that there as one of the first ones there. So tell us what leaders should think about using instead of he or she or ladies and gentlemen. How should we be more inclusive instead of using that colloquial stuff which we're used to?
Right. So because Nils, that is gendered language, right? You're
Mhm.
identifying two genders, and there are more than two genders. You're not including people that are non-binary, people that are gender fluid, for example. And you want to make sure that you're saying something like everyone or team or
Mhm.
um, all or something like that, where it includes every person.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen was a hard one to break. Another one, Nils, that I would say as someone from the Northeast is guys. Hi,
Yes.
guys. Thanks,
I wanted to
guys.
get to
Right?
that one. You guys.
How was the hardest one for me to break? I mean,
Yep.
it was 40 something years of saying that. And
Yeah.
then I'm like, okay, this is not inclusive. And I tripped over that, Nils, for a good year before I worked it out of
And what
out
is
of
your
my language.
go-to now instead of you guys?
Everyone.
Everyone. Love it. And
Mhm.
does your when you now have worked it out and you go in, do you ever give it a second thought? Do you ever slip back, or once you get to that point, you're like, okay, it's just now it's part of the habit and I don't have to worry about it as much?
It's pretty much part of the habit, but if I'm talking to my family, um, you know, us Northeasterners, it'll slip back in from time to time, and I'll just correct myself.
Yeah. If you get back in that family environment or you hear it, other people saying it, it just comes back out. And
It
that's
does.
some of the risk, right? As we
Mhm.
return back into offices, there's a
Yes,
lot of those things that we used to talk about and just do that were totally normal, which are going to come back again, which maybe took a little bit of a break during the pandemic when we were all separated and virtual because it was just a different dynamic and different environment.
absolutely. And there's just so much more small talk, Nils, and
Yes.
you know, conversations around the water cooler and in the break room, and you've got to pay attention to the language that you're using. The most important thing that I would say is just listen to what you're
Mm,
saying.
yeah.
And if you say something that's not inclusive, just correct yourself in the moment. The more
Yeah.
you do that, the more you'll work out of it.
Good. Okay. Another one that I thought was really interesting was the Mr., Mrs., Miss. And that
Hmm.
one, because I had not seen, there was one of the recommendations was more inclusive was MX.
Hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that. It was something that was totally new. You said first name or last name and then MX, or if they have a doctor or something like that, you
Hmm.
could add that in. But the Mr., Mrs., and Miss, give us the kind of evolution there and what we should be thinking.
Right. So we're not being, what we're doing when we look at someone, we make assumptions about what their gender is
Mm-hmm.
based on the way they're dressed, what their haircut looks like, and it may not be representative of their gender identity,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
based on our assumptions. And so we don't want to use Mr. or Miss and misgender someone unintentionally and offend them. So we want to
Mm,
make sure that, if in writing you can say MX. Certainly don't, when I'm speaking, I usually refer to people by their first name.
yeah.
And that's an inclusive way to speak to someone.
Hmm.
But, another thing, Nils, in that same vein is you often end with, thank you, ma'am, or thank you, sir,
Yes.
which
Yes.
can do the same thing.
Wow.
And what I've found is a best practice is to fill that space, because it's hard to say thank you when you're used to saying thank you, ma'am, right? You have that extra syllable right
Yes.
after.
Yeah.
So saying thank you so much fills that
Mm,
space, but doesn't, give that impulse of
yeah.
gendering someone with ma'am and sir, which again, I'm in the South now. And so that's something that's prevalent here as a
All the
sign of
time.
respect.
Yeah.
And certainly, for grandparents, right? The gender of your grandparents, and if that's their preference, I do not recommend that you get away from that.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. So, environmentally specific or contextually relevant approach to the language. But in that case, it was used as a term of respect, even though
Mhm.
generations have passed and now it has a potentially completely different meaning. That's a lot to consider and keep in your
Yeah.
mind when you're connecting with different people from different geographic locations.
Absolutely. And the most important thing, Nils, and I'll say this probably a few times in the conversation, is this is all a journey. It's
Yeah.
all learning. The most important thing is that as leaders, you're considering what it is that you're saying and then asking
Mhm.
questions. Is this the
Yeah.
right word? Should I be using this word?
Mhm.
Or what does this word really mean? What's
Yeah.
the historical significance of this word? And taking a little bit of time, Google is everyone's friend with that, right? Taking a little bit of
Yeah.
time to check it, and say,
Hmm.
you know what? Oh, maybe I shouldn't be using that word. Or,
Wow.
yeah, this word seems to be okay. Asking yourself those questions as an inclusive leader is so important.
Yeah. Wow. Amazing. So the next one I wanted to ask you about was the disability and invisible illnesses.
Hmm.
And it said, did you know that 26% of adults in the United States have some type of disability, and that 60% of adults in the United States have a chronic disease? I
Yeah,
was blown away by that statistic because this doesn't always come up in the professional environment. It doesn't have to, right?
that's right.
But again, the awareness that 26%, what was it? Yeah, 26% of adults are living with some form of disability was just mind blowing. And thinking about how that impacts your work as a leader and the language that you use and how you talk about anything potentially even related to that disability. And a lot of people probably are going to be pretty shy and don't want to talk about it.
Absolutely. And there's a handful of things to consider there, Nils. One is, when we were young, we would have questions,
Mm-hmm.
especially around people that look different than us or had disabilities, and so we would want to ask those questions. And a lot of times, our parents would say, "Shh, don't ask, right?
Right.
Don't say
Right.
anything,
Yes.
right?"
Yes.
And so now we don't know what to say because we've been taught not to bring it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so that puts us at a disadvantage, and so many of us at a disadvantage. And then disability is the identity group that any of us can become a part of at any time.
Tell me more about that.
Right. So, as we get older, right, disabilities are mobility, for example, things
Yeah.
like diabetes, any kind of chronic illness can, you know, be part of our lives.
Yeah.
Accidents, right?
Accidents that can happen anytime,
That can
right?
happen at any time.
Mm,
And, so, our health can change at any point.
yeah.
And, diagnoses throughout our entire life can occur and change how we're able to navigate the world. And because of that, I want to work for an organization that understands and prioritizes DEI,
Yeah.
because whether I am, from a culturally diverse background, or I'm a woman, or I'm part of LGBTQ plus community, or I'm neurodiverse, or I'm a veteran, all of the different um, cultural and experiential um, parts of diversity. I want to know that
Mhm.
my organization cares about me, cares about my
Yeah.
experience and my ability to perform at a high level. And, and again, with disability in particular, any of us can become a part of that group at any time. And I want to know that I work for an organization that is going to make sure that I'm supported as an employee.
Yeah. Wow. That's tremendous, tremendous insight. And that is, I think it's, sometimes we can think, well, it's not going to happen to me. I won't
Hmm.
have something happen. And then it does. And,
Yeah,
sure enough, you find yourself there and it's always a humbling experience, no matter what it is or how severe. Hopefully it's not, but it is a very humbling experience. So to your
absolutely.
point, right? We want to work for companies that recognize that and appreciate that and support
That's
that, because it's not the disability that's important. It's the work and the people and the person and who they are and valuing them. And, it just has to be a set of circumstances that they're going through. And if we can support them, they hopefully will still have a great relationship.
absolutely.
So there was one other term that you had in the book here that was normal person.
Hmm.
Normal person. That's one of those ones that comes up quite a bit. Oh, Nelsey's just a normal guy, right?
Right.
There's two of them right there, normal and guy.
Uh-huh.
Um, so tell us about why normal person is not the most inclusive word, and perhaps what we should be thinking about instead of thinking of somebody as a normal person.
Right. There are two things, Nils. One, what is a normal person, right? You're putting your own assumptions on what you
Mhm.
think is normal.
Yeah.
And then, as you dig into the statistics, Nils, like you just were with disability, you realize that, these minority groups are not minority groups at all,
Mm.
right? They're so much a part of our population in so many areas. And so, it's not the majority is normal. And then, something over here, something is wrong with you in these assumptions that you're making. It makes people feel othered. It makes them feel not included. And you don't want to use the word normal, one, with your own assumptions on what that is,
Yeah.
and two, to make people feel outside of a group and not included,
Mm.
and uncomfortable.
Yeah. And again, just the awareness that, oh my gosh, like, yeah, I'm using a term that technically everybody knows what normal is. The reality is everybody has a different definition of what normal
That's
is,
exactly right.
right? And it's a what I like to call in the leadership world just a loaded term. Like there is
Hmm.
no one definition. If you look it up in the dictionary, it might say something, but it does not apply to more than one person. And that person, the reason it applies is because it's their definition, whatever that happens to be.
That's
Right.
right.
All right. So this
Absolutely.
last one was I want to very curious about this because you spent time in sales and marketing and
Hmm.
inside of organizations, and there's this concept that gets talked about a lot of the battlefield or going to war, and we're
Hmm.
going out to conquer a new territory. We're going to take down. There's a really visual stuff that usually my guess is that it's intended to inspire motivation from the troops and get people excited and feel like it is a huge challenge that we are going to take on. But in reality, that's not very inclusive language. So tell us a little bit more about that visualization. It happens a lot. I'd probably say, I would guess more on the sales and marketing side, sales
For
in
sure.
particular, and how we might be able to adjust our language to get the same feeling that we want, but use a much more inclusive set of words.
Nils, and this was one that for me as a writer was a little, it took a little bit of the wind out of my sails. I
Mm-hmm.
love over exaggerating
Right.
words, right? And creating this beautiful imagery. And what I found out is that for people who have been to war,
Mm-hmm.
it really does that service a disservice
Mm.
by comparing a meeting, right, where I'm
Yeah.
entirely safe, bullets are not flying,
Yep.
right? I've just got to sit in a room and say the right things in the right way to get what I want. It's
Yeah.
not the same.
Right. And I can walk out of this room at any time. No problem. No questions asked.
Absolutely. And for people who have put their life on the line for our freedom,
Mm-hmm.
right? And understand what that real fear, that visceral fear of life and death in the moment is. It does them a disservice. It disrespects
Yeah.
that sacrifice, and it also can make them relive that in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
and really shift their energy. Have them in a situation where they're feeling uncomfortable, feeling upset, and then making them feel like an unsafe environment. And we've all been offended by something someone has said in the
Yes.
workplace, and it really can ruin our day.
Oh
and
yeah.
and a lot of times they didn't mean to offend us, but we can't stop thinking about it. We're kind of
Mm-hmm.
working kind of mad, right? And so you want to be careful of those words and those phrases, um, because you don't know how it affects someone in the moment.
Yeah.
And Nils,
That's
along that same lines, one of the things that I often said, right, when I skipped breakfast is, "Oh, I'm starving," right?
yes.
I'm not starving. I just
Mm-hmm.
skipped breakfast. But
Yeah.
for people who, have experienced food insecurity, that
Mm.
can be triggering. And
Wow.
so we don't want to over exaggerate our current feeling or status, and reach into someone's, you know, deep experience with something negative like that,
Yeah.
and remind them of that, bring that up, bring that back to them in the moment.
Wow. That's and just another example of something we might say every day. I'm starving and
That's right.
not have had any taken that into consideration that the reality is no, you're not. And you probably have know where your next meal is coming from. You just skip the last one, right? And not
That's
taking
right.
into somebody else's situation into account can be offensive and can put
That's
somebody at an uneasy position. And then, as a leader, our job is to help people be productive and be successful and do everything possible to make sure they have what they need. And if we're taking that away through the language that we use, then we're doing everybody a disservice.
That's exactly right, Nils. And inclusive leadership is about creating the environment where people feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
respected, and encouraged to contribute their thoughts and ideas, and to a better end.
Yeah.
and it creates better business. And so whether you subscribe to the camp of this is the right thing to do for my employees, or you need a little bit of the business case pull, which is
Mhm.
totally okay.
Yeah.
There are benefits to taking the time with this. And if you think about these examples, Nils, I know you probably have some listeners that are saying, oh my gosh, that is a lot of different stuff. I don't know how I could
Mhm.
ever learn it. But,
Yep.
just like you learn anything else, you learn how to adjust your language to create those environments of inclusion.
Love it. And the key theme here that you said at the very beginning, which I want to bring back up, is the progress, not perfection.
That's
Right.
right.
And I take the exact same approach from a leadership skill development perspective in
Hmm.
the B2B Leaders Academy. Is it's about progress. It's not about perfection. There's no way you will be perfect in all these things. I'm not. And I teach this stuff.
Right.
Right.
Same.
Same with you. Right. It's okay. But we can always improve. And we can, if we choose to focus on a particular area,
Hmm.
then we can get some tools, just like you have in your wonderful book and just like I have inside the B2B Leaders Academy. And you go deep and you
Yeah,
implement those tools and you integrate them and you experiment and you make mistakes and you learn and then you grow. But you're growing in a consistent fashion because you decided what was important. And I hope
that's
that after
exactly.
listening to this conversation, if you hadn't decided before that DE&I was important, I hope that you do now. So, Jackie, where can people get a hold of your book and find out more about you in the diversity movement as well?
Absolutely. So you can learn more about the diversity movement at thediversitymovement.com. There you'll find lots and lots of free resources that will help you with inclusive language, inclusive leadership, and lots of other concepts. You can also go to the inclusivelanguagehandbook.com to order copies of the book in paperback or digital. And then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn at the Jackie Ferguson.
Love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we'll include all those links in the show notes as well. Jackie, thank you so much for sharing your incredible expertise and wisdom, talking all things DE and I. I'm super excited, one, to have connected with you, two, to read your book, and three, for me to start making some changes. I commit 100% to eliminating some of those words that I found in your book, which I was not aware of, being potentially offensive to other people. So I thank you for that and helping guide me in becoming a better leader.
Nils, thank you so much. I've so enjoyed this conversation.
All right. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.